when I talk about presuppositional apologetics, I'm simply talking about that apologetics that takes seriously the biblical revelation that God has revealed himself, that the basis of our knowledge of anything is found first and foremost in our acknowledgement of God. And that therefore we must have a biblical doctrine of God, a biblical doctrine of man, and that if we have a biblical doctrine of God and a biblical doctrine of man, that is going to provide us with a solid foundation for understanding the laws of logic, rationality, but that I must continue to function as a Christian in doing apologetics. I cannot, I dare not, I am not allowed to cease being under the lordship of Christ when I begin to reason with the unbeliever. There is no neutral ground upon which we can stand, because anything that exists because Jesus Christ made it. If it's a fact, Jesus Christ made it a fact, and Jesus Christ defines it. And so I cannot abandon the lordship of Christ to then attempt to establish the lordship of Christ. So I do not believe that a non-reformed individual can consistently be a presuppositionalist. I don't, because part of presuppositionalism is a recognition of the fundamental rebellion of man against the knowledge of God, the suppression of the knowledge of God. And so I just point out that, for example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18, the word of the cross is indeed to those who are perishing foolishness, but to those who are being saved, to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. You have a message of the cross, which contains particular historical and theological assertions and facts. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, fulfilled prophecy in his coming, the reasons of his coming, et cetera, et cetera. And so the message of the cross is indeed to those who are perishing foolishness. So there is a description of an individuals, plural, as those who are perishing, in contrast those who are being saved. Now, the text is going to say, and which one you are is up to God. So there is a very strong reformed element in what is said here. But the point is that it's the same message. And the conclusion for the one, foolishness. The conclusion for the other, power of God. And it is what state you are in that determines how you're going to interpret this. You cannot alter the logos tou starou, the message of the cross, so as to make it the power of God to those who are perishing. You can't do that. If you try to do that, it's no longer the message of the cross. And so the point is, it is a fundamental biblical reality brought out later on by Paul in the same text, where he's saying, you know, the Jews, they're seeking signs, the Greeks seeking wisdom, but to those who are called by God, to the elect, Christ, the power of God, Christ, the wisdom of God, so on and so forth, it is a fundamental necessity to recognize the necessity of the work of the Spirit of God, and that the Spirit of God can actually accomplish what God intends to accomplish in that situation. Not that we're not talking here some marshmallow prevenient grace stuff. We're talking about the grace of God that actually grants spiritual life, insight, takes out a heart of stone, gives a heart of flesh. The only heart that's ever going to love God is the heart of flesh, not the heart of stone. And in the same way, in Romans chapter 1, you have this exchanging. The exchanging, you know, they profess themselves to be wise, they became fools. Their foolish hearts were darkened. The very seat of what makes man man loses that natural light of revelation when a person is in sin. And it is not until there is that fundamental change that that light can then function as that light is intended to function, and will function in that fashion. So the point is that at key elements in New Testament revelation concerning the nature of the fallen man, you have biblical teaching. You have direct biblical teaching of the necessity of the work of the Spirit because of a fundamental problem in the person who is fallen. And this must, therefore, impact apologetics. When you don't have that underlying theology, and that is not the majority theology, never has been. Why has it never happened? Because it is utterly destructive of human pride. It's utterly destructive of human pride. God's the one who saves. We can't save ourselves. We can't save somebody else. We're totally dependent upon God. We are used of him. We are called to be the ones that proclaim his message. And we should have a boldness to do so. But it is foolishness to think that I can trick somebody into doing the right thing, that I can trick someone into making the right decision. And so when you have that understanding, it's going to fundamentally impact how you do apologetics. You're going to be looking at the presuppositions that are created by the rebel sinner that fundamentally make it impossible for the claims of Christ to be real to that person. And you're going to focus upon that, and you're going to pray that God will use you. All the arguments in the world aren't going to change that person's position because they are not a neutral moral agent or a moral neutral agent, either one. Their reasoning has been fundamentally impacted. And as long as they are perishing, that message will remain to them foolishness. And the only one that can stop them from perishing is the giver of life. So apologetics has to be done in the hopes of God's self-glorification in the salvation of his people. Also recognizing that apologetics has the function of edifying the saints, building the saints up in their faith. And both the proclamation of the message and apologetics has another function that most people don't even want to think about, and that is increasing the judgment of the rebellious. Again, I don't even want to hear that. I'm going to tune you out now. But the fact of the matter is that when you have that level of light being given to someone, why did Jesus go to Bethsaida? Why did he go to Chorazin? Why did he go? Why did he go to places where they want to throw him off of a cliff? Were there people saved there? Well, in God's sovereignty, yes. But the reality is that Jesus said that if Sodom and Gomorrah, which were watchwords for the most evil people in ancient history, amongst the Jewish people anyways, if Sodom and Gomorrah had had the light that Chorazin and Bethsaida had, they would have repented long ago. That's not some dumb middle knowledge argument. It's making a point. And the point is, if you can see God's justice in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, how much more should you see God's justice in the destruction of Chorazin and Bethsaida? The Son of God walked amongst them. The Son of God taught the truth amongst them, and they didn't care. Now, you say, but God could have changed their hearts. Yes, he could have. So there is a purpose why God is demonstrating the sovereignty of his grace and the salvation of a specific people. And there will not be a single mouth that will open to argue that God was unjust to judge anyone that he judges. Because when the books are opened, all the motivations of the heart will be seen. And once again, Question I've asked many times before. Romans chapter 9. What if God, willing in patience to deal with vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, for what purpose? For the demonstration of his power. And if you can look into your heart and honestly say, I want to see God's power glorified. I want to see his holiness known. I want to see his justice done, along with his mercy and his love and his grace. There are not many people who can honestly look in their hearts and say, I want to see God's power displayed. When they do say that, it's to give me a Cadillac or a Lexus or something. That's not what we're talking about. The power there is God's power in the judgment of sinners. In Romans 9, the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction. Yeah, it's right there in the text. Okay, so with that,